I just spent $2.1 million building a fully functional port, but with no ships. So why would I do that? Because this isn't your typical port build. This is phase 1 of what will be the biggest industrial project I've ever taken on. Everything here is just the foundation for something much bigger. A fully interconnected, multi-industry megaport. And it all starts today. So this is going to be the build area for today. One thing that's nice about this particular build area is that it is a finite amount of space. We've got the highway on the left, we've got the water on the right, then we've got the football stadium and that industrial and farmland directly above it. So the big benefit for me in particular is that really it's just going to rein me in and make sure that I don't go mad and I end up expanding and building a massive area when that's really not what I'm setting out to do. I can be quite guilty in terms of trying to build something out and then just, I'm enjoying myself, I just keep building and building, and then I end up with like 15 hours worth of footage and regrets that I have to then go and try and edit the blooming thing. So I thought at least this should hopefully keep things in check. Now the first big asset that I'm going to be using here is a signature building. It's the JP Hirado Pharmaceutical Factory by Pharma. Now this is a great asset, it's so well made. I do need to give you guys a little bit of a heads up though. There is a message on the description here that says they don't plan on making any more assets for City Skylines 2 in the future, and they would like to remove the assets currently available, but they're going to leave them for the time being. They won't be fixing any bugs, so please unsubscribe. Goodbye. So if you want to grab that asset, you might want to go and get it now. However, if they remove it from the workshop, I'm not entirely sure what that means for the city going forward. Whether it stays in there or whether it is removed, I'm not entirely sure. But nonetheless, it's something to just keep in mind if you're planning on using it yourself. So I'm going to connect some of the Dutch style roads that you commonly see, but one thing I'm not going to do is actually connect the bike and the pedestrian lane, not down here at least anyway. It's quite a tight space, but also this is supposed to be a more secure port area. So rather than doing what I'm usually doing, what I'm going to do instead is I'm actually going to, a little bit later on in the video, run the pedestrian and the bike access just to the port entrance, and hopefully we'll give them access that way. So let's just give things a quick once over. I have connected it to water and electricity, so we should be in business. Yeah, everything's up and running, good to go. Perfect. So around the back of here, what I'd like to do is to provide some, perhaps, storage for raw materials that this pharmaceutical factory might need. These little tank assets from Piccana on the workshop are going to work particularly nicely. These things should store oil, chemicals and petrochemicals, so it's a nice little fit here. What I'm also going to do then is I'm going to add some similar storage, and this time I'm going to be using it directly from the port menu, and we're going to add just a little bit of variation, add a few smaller ones, a few bigger ones, and just mix things up a little bit visually. Now that little road that was going round the back really didn't make sense because we're going to have a lot of trucks coming in and out of here, so I think what I had to do is just replace all of them and then just rejig some of the assets, try and squeeze them in. It's quite a tight space already as it is, but there was still enough in the end and it wasn't too big of a deal just shifting them into place. Now although I have the factory connected up to services, I did notice that I don't actually have the port connected, so I'm going to have to address that. And one of the reasons why I wanted a port here is that I wanted some of the port assets. I think having the big storage assets, container assets up against the highway would look pretty good. I think once we've got a lot more traffic coming out here later on, it's going to look pretty cool when we have a look on some first person views. Another reason that I wanted the port here is that I wanted that train station asset. It's really cool, to be honest with you. And the actual train station is going to form part of a complete cargo rail network that I've got planned for later on in the series. So I did mention obviously that this is going to be kind of phase 1 almost, if you like, of our port, and what I want to do is I want to try and aim for something that's maybe not quite on the scale, but something that's going to resemble the big port in Rotterdam. I think that sounds, when I say it out loud, hugely optimistic. I don't quite know if I'll be able to pull it off. I'm not quite sure exactly how big we're going to be able to get the city either, but one thing I definitely want to do is to get busy carving out, our own waterways and our own docks and get nice and creative with that. I think we've got loads to choose from in terms of industry, and I reckon it will be a fun one to do. A project of that scope, of course, will take a long time. That will be over many episodes, no doubt, but it's going to give me another area in the city that I can kind of jump in between, and if I get bored doing something, I can jump into another part of the city and crack on with that. So currently we have obviously the suburbs that still need to be expanded, the industry, well, I'm just talking about the industry now. We've still got a fair bit of medium density in the main island, and we've got all of the old town stuff that I have loads and loads of ideas for as well. So yeah, I'm not short of ideas, it's just time, isn't it, is always the killer in this game. So I'm going to connect the rail network out to the outside connection, and while I'm over here, I'm going to get rid of this stuff that you guys will have never seen before. This is our out of town train depot and our subway depot, I think it was rather, and our bus station. So we have replaced them on the previous episodes, and now it is time to say goodbye. As we continue building out the city, I do plan on incorporating a few of the other city services that are, again, out in the sticks. You won't have seen them potentially before, or you might have just seen them fleetingly perhaps on previous episodes. They serve the functions for me in terms of getting the city started, but in terms of actually completing a city and making sure everything has its proper place, then we can take these opportunities here and there just to kind of take these things out of the map and give them a much better location. Now obviously this isn't looking particularly fancy out here, but that's fine. It's just a base to get it started, and we can obviously expand on this later on. So taking a step back, I just wanted to make sure that everything was working okay, and it absolutely wasn't when I was building this. I just didn't pay attention as to exactly where the roads needed to be connected, and I realised that I was going to have to shift something. Now, there was two choices. I could either shift the entire rail network over a bit, or I could just redo some of the highways. Now the highways were pretty horrible, to be honest, and they needed kind of redone anyway. The tunnels were pretty ugly. They were again, they were just thrown in there as temporary measures. So I thought, may as well just get that sorted. If I just shift it over a little bit to the right hand side, then that should give me a bit more space where I can put the required roads that I need for those port assets. So what I'll do at this point is I'll just tidy things up a little bit, make sure that the rail doesn't have any janky sections, and then I'll quickly redo these roads, but we'll have a look at them later. So I reckon I'm pretty happy with the pharmaceutical factory here. I think it's a pretty good location. What I'm going to do just now then is I'm just going to nail down really just some of the final points on it. So last thing I wanted to do was just add a couple of larger oil tankers here, again just to add that sort of visual break, if you like, and add a wee bit more height and a bit more contrast in terms of the actual skyline itself, once it's built out. Going to use a number of surfaces as we do that, really just to fill things out, and I'm probably going to disappoint one particular person by adding these surfaces, but what are you going to do? However, that said, although I will be adding a reasonable bit of concrete here, which is obviously expected in an industrial build, I am going to have scope to add a little bit of greenery a little bit later on in this build, and I'm going to be grabbing some inspiration from an area, a real life area as well, and I'll show you that inspo as we kind of build out. But over here where we have this area that's essentially blank canvas, it gives us a little bit more opportunity to get some detailing, and industry specific detailing is what I'm after. Now when I do these videos, I always try and get them out on early access for memberships, so anybody on Patreon or anybody supporting on YouTube tends to get them a couple of days early. However, this one won't be particularly early access, as I've been pretty ill this week. To give you a Scottish term, I've been feeling pretty peely-wally. I've not really managed to get an awful lot done over the past couple of days, so I would point out that if I do come across as being a little bit low energy, or lower energy than normal, then that is the reason why. But I guess it does highlight the importance of memberships for creators. If the creator is ill, or if the creator is struggling to get content out for any other reason, or even just if the views dip, then it does give that extra bit of stability. So I just want to thank everybody who has subscribed as a membership one way or the other. It's truly appreciated, guys. Thanks very much. So I reckon it's time to crack on now and get the rest of this port built out. So I'm just going to be using the main port building, grabbing the assets from the upgrade tool and just adding them. I'm going to use Anarchy here. I'm going to overlap them because I want to really just use up as much space as I possibly can. There's 3 options to choose from on that warehousing asset, but they didn't quite fit just the way I wanted it to, so I don't mind having them overlapping a little bit. I am going to use the built-in roads that we have for the ports, but I'm going to surface these a little bit later on. I think it looks quite a lot better, but again, that's personal preference whether you bother doing that or not. It's entirely up to yourself. Alongside the factory, I want to introduce some vanilla stuff here as well. I am going to recolour it a little bit and just lighten things up a bit. I want it to roughly match what we have here beside the Pharma building, and I am going to add just an extra bit of fire control here as well. And again, just going to recolour that, and I think that looks pretty tidy. I think it all matches quite nicely. Around the back of it, what I'd like to do is to just provide some parking. So I'm going to use the really thin, what are they called, the alley roads, right? And then I'm going to add some extra vanilla parking as well. No need to get too fancy here. I'm not going to mess about with any custom parking. It just bores the life out of me making that stuff, so I'm not going to do it unless it's a really awkward gap. And we've got some pretty good choices with the vanilla parking stuff, being completely honest. What I will do though is I will remove some of the prop work that we have here. I think it's probably just a little bit too fancy for this part of the industrial city. And what I'd also like to do is to grab some of the static ploppables from StarQ. Going to use one of the cargo warehouses, going to drag it over here, and it should fit quite nicely. And I reckon what I'll do is I'll probably use a couple of these, make a nice L shape. So we can take a minute just to check in and see how things are looking. I think here at the Pharma building, extending the surfaces there, giving it the additional road access on the right hand side is a nice addition. It kind of looks like it's all been part of the same build built at the same time. I did add a little invisible road there, but nobody seems to be using it. That's fine. I can see that they are walking through it though, so that's pretty cool. Now, talking about walking, one thing I would probably want to point out at this point is that I haven't actually connected any pedestrian roads, so they have to be walking on the highway. Well, not the highway, but the highway asset that I've used as a local road, and I want to try and avoid that, so we're definitely going to have to come back and rethink things. So here's the idea I had, making this a bit of an L-shaped warehouse. I think what I'd like to do is in fact connect that to the actual Pharma building as well, and I think we can do that by just grabbing a little static ploppable office here, place it down, make sure it kind of makes sense where we're putting it, and yeah, we've just got a nice little extension, and we will be making these things functional obviously as well. Not necessarily this tiny little office asset, but the actual main warehousing. I'd like to get some traffic coming in and out here. Talking about traffic, we've got plenty coming in. Not unmanageable at this point. That said, we don't really have all that much development coming in and out here. We've got a little bit of a port, and we've got one factory and a couple of industrial assets. That said, most of the traffic isn't actually coming in here. It's going into the main industrial area, so I'm not quite panicking just yet. Part of the reason why I want this rail in here and why I want it as an external connection is that I'm hoping that I can really manage traffic and minimize traffic as I really extend and build out the industrial area in later episodes. My plan and hope is to have a completely connected city with cargo rail going right the way through the industry and connecting at some point the city centre. But lots of work to do to get to that point. I'm going to briefly show you a little bit of inspiration for the next part of the build. This is just across the water from the main Rotterdam port, and here we have some water services coupled together with a bit of green space, and of course we've got some electricity generation on the go as well. What I plan on doing is grabbing these small scale builds and incorporating it into much larger developments. Well, that's the plan. We'll see how that pans out. So I touched on this a little bit earlier on in the video. As we build out the rest of the city and we find places for city services, what I'm going to be doing is removing some of the existing stuff. Now, I won't quite be ready to do that here with the additional water services, or in fact for any of the electricity services. They aren't quite powerful enough to cover the needs for the entire city. However, this will be the first of many that I'm planning on doing, and I'm going to pick a few nice spots here and there where we have some of the industry and try and shoehorn them in where I think it makes sense. Some of the stuff that I really haven't looked at since episode 1, quite frankly, are the garbage services and the power services, all very much tucked away in a little corner of the city. So I think bringing them into play and really having a nice build, sometimes perhaps, you know, making an entire episode around them might be a nice little addition. And it's certainly going to be a lot more interesting than being hidden away miles from the city itself. I know some of you guys in the comments have asked for maybe some gas services instead of nuclear that we currently have, but we'll see how we get on as we build out. One thing I'd like to do is to make sure that we have good distribution on the electricity. Now, I did add these big pylons here. I don't know about it, to be honest. I might end up ripping these out. I think they kind of looked alright, but going up and over a big stack interchange, I do not think that is the play. So we'll get them weeked out at some point. I'm going to keep them in for just now, but yeah, I think some alternative routing is in order for these bad boys. So although I'm not necessarily particularly sold on their actual placement currently, one thing I would definitely like to do is to certainly make sure that they are in the build. They do add quite a lot to the cityscape and the overall view, and a little bit of extra detailing as well. So I need to get my thinking cap on and figure out a better solution. One thing I will be doing, however, though, is keeping the little transformer station over here. I think that's a welcome addition. They always look good in a bit of an industrial build, don't they? Always find that these assets are really quite bright, so I'm going to recolour them and really just tone it down a little bit. that sheer whiteness is just a little bit blinding, I think, sometimes, and potentially could maybe make the same argument for the port roads as well. But as a vanilla asset, I'm not complaining too much. Now, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill a few gaps, add a bit extra parking here and there where it makes sense. There will be some surfaces that still need to be put down here. I'm not going to go too mad. I am going to leave a little bit of grass. Some of you will be happy to hear. And obviously, I want to rely on that real life inspiration and have something that's not a million miles away. But again, as always, we're just creating our own sort of version of things. Now I'm just going to go ahead and take a quick minute just to sort out a couple of more surfaces, tidy up a few things, and then we can crack on with adding a few additional features to the build and some of the detailing. So now that we have really all the main building blocks of the build done and dusted, now it's time to add a bit more interest, a bit more detail, and we'll jump into a kind of more street level view. So what I want to do here is I want to hook up a proper pedestrian access and bike access. I want to secure the area with some fencing. I want to add a bit more vanilla industry like I'm doing here, and obviously as we do that we'll tidy up the surfaces and do a bit of prop work as well. Speaking about prop work, I'm not going to go too mad. This isn't going to be particularly mega detailed or anything like that, but I'm going to add a bit of prop work and really just break up a lot of the surfaces when I think it's kind of needed. The other thing I'll be doing is adding some dirt decals, but again, this looks like a sort of reasonably modern development, so I am not going to go too crazy with them, and it's not going to be super dirty, super industrial. It's all going to have still a relatively clean feel, I guess, being a modern build. There was a little bit to tidy up here just along the hills and the vegetation. We've got trees here directly in our electricity asset, so we want to remove that, of course. That's pretty much a terrible fire hazard, so we can't have that. But other than that, I'll spend a little bit of time on the actual entrance of the facility itself, and I wanted to add a bit of functionality to some of the ploppable, the big warehouses that we put in earlier. I want to add StarQ's blocks on there, and we'll get some traffic in and out of the place. Talking about traffic, we can see that the place is getting nice and busy now. Trains are running at full pelt as they should. We've got a reasonable bit of traffic on the interchange, but the interchange is still holding up even though we've added quite a few new buildings, and quite a few of these are generating a fair bit of traffic. Now we may or may not need to add a bit of a traffic light to that interchange. That said, we do also have an option that if we find that there's a lot of industry traffic coming to the port, then it's not really going to be too much of a big issue giving them a bit of an access road. So the way I would propose to do that, if it's necessary, is perhaps make a side port entrance. We can have a tunnel going directly to the industry across the road, directly into the port, and that should be pretty straightforward. All I'd need to do is really just take away a little bit of farmland, connect the tunnel, maybe even directly to one of the roundabouts over there, and everything should work pretty smoothly. I don't think that's going to be necessary, but the option's there, and it's not a big deal if it needs to be done. So what I'm going to do right now then is I'm going to finish off a little bit of detailing, and then we can have a look to see how things finished off at the end of the video. What I'm going to do just now is to take a step back, and I want you guys to have a pretty good view in terms of how this build works with the rest of the builds around it. What I was trying to set out to do was to have something that was going to complement obviously the big industry zone that we have next door, but something that would perhaps not look too out of place with our media centre and all the rest of it across the road. You can probably see from this view, part of the reason why I didn't make it a ship port is that it's pretty limited space. If I was to make a port, then ideally what I would want to do is to start messing about and get the landscaping tool out and really start getting creative and actually make some docks. There simply just wasn't the space for it in this particular build, and we're going to have plenty of opportunity to get stuck into that later on. And with that said, I am really looking forward to start really bringing the waterway to life. I reckon we're getting a bit of a selection on the workshop with ships. I'd like to see plenty of more, of course, that's always on the wish list. And we still have some of those islands between this build and the main island build that need to be worked on as well. That's going to give us a nice bit of variety, and I think we're going to see a lot of mixed use development in that particular part of the city. One thing I was curious to find out was just exactly what benefits the port might have on the city. So I did have a look at industry demand. I thought that might be boosted. It really wasn't, but in fairness, you know, we did do a bit of industry building, so that might have had an effect. In terms of unemployment, that did go down, but actually our city population went down by a couple of thousand during that build as well, so perhaps I can't read too much into that. But as I said earlier on, the main point on this build was really just to kickstart the cargo rail network, and in that regard it was a success. I can see that there's more than twice the amount of cargo going in and out of the city now. Most of that is still on trucks in fairness, but it was interesting seeing that number go up, and I'm not quite sure exactly how that works with the overall output in terms of industry citywide, but either way, as long as we're providing these options, I'm hoping it will at least bring a bit of traffic off the motorway network. So that's it for this one, guys. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.